and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard. I'm Andy Hum.
Ann Northrup is back in the seat and will be for the foreseeable future.
And in just moments, we will be joined by our guest, Mitchell Gold. He's the founder of Faith in America, and he's here to talk about his campaign to, formidable, rid religion of homophobia and prevent suicide and bullying.
He wrote a very strong letter to the Pope, and we will talk about that. We're also going to talk about those darn Republicans who are poised to confirm right-wing Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court, who will then go on to overturn reproductive rights and rights to health care and a whole long list.
In better news, we have a record number of college football players who are out this year.
We're very sorry to hear of the death of longtime lesbian activist Janet Weinberg, who, among other things, was for a while the CEO of GMHC.
In Wilton Manors, Florida, the murderer of a gay couple has been sentenced to death.
The new Prime Minister of Australia, who's a sort of cranky right-wing guy, is attacking teachers for helping identify students struggling with their gender identity. He doesn't think that's a good idea.
In Taiwan, where the court ordered them to do same-sex marriage, there are now going to be 2, maybe 3 referenda on the ballot on the subject.
3?
Well, there's 3 different lines. Yeah, we'll go into it.
And you'll be so relieved to know that Kevin Spacey is off the hook for 1 sex crime in LA, statute of limitations, but they're investigating others. And
we turn to our guest, Mitchell Gold. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great
Faith in America. Last time you were here, you talked about Faith in America, and since then you've merged with the Tyler Clementi Foundation. We'll put all that up. But the reason for your coming in today is you're renewing your campaign to try to rid religion of homophobia. What got you started on it this time? What in particular are you trying to do?
Well, I wanted to take advantage of the moment when the Catholic Church is in the news about how they have turned a blind eye to abusing young, innocent kids. And the real thing I wanted to touch on was when the Pope said we have to get to the root of the problem. I wanted to make sure the Pope knows what the root of the problem is, because I feel like it's one of those things where he'll dance around it and other Catholics will dance around it. But the real root is the very teaching of the Church. And when you teach young kids that they're broken and that they're, I'm trying to think of what the Catholic Church says now. I've forgot it.
They're disordered.
It's disoriented.
Intrinsically disordered.
Intrinsically disordered, thank you. Intrinsically disordered, when you tell a 15-year-old kid that, they feel broken, and too many of those kids go into the priesthood. I remember many years ago that I was dating a guy, just a couple of dates, and the next thing I know, he told me he was going to seminary to become a priest. And I said, why would you do that? He said, because then I will be celibate and control my homosexuality. But the reality is, this is what some of the priests are. But regardless, the whole system of asking people to be celibate, not having women that are ordained in leadership and having an equal place, these are the root causes. And I wanted to point them out to the Pope and to other people.
Now there's a civil war brewing in the Catholic Church with this, is it Archbishop Vigano?
A far right-winger as opposed to a right-winger.
Who is blaming gay priests in the church for all the abuse and trying to get rid of Pope Francis for tolerating gay priests and being supposedly more open and liberal on homosexuality as regards the church.
Well, I think he also said that the Pope knew about what was going on, and
Yes.
he was complicit with it.
And so did Archbishop Vigano
and he's
know about
calling on the Pope to resign partly because of that.
Can I suggest, though, that the abuse is related perhaps not just to repressed sexuality, but to, in fact, predators who find the church a convenient and place to play out their
It's all of that
impulses.
horrible stuff. I mean, there's no one thing. And I would go back to, I think women should be ordained and have leadership positions as well. What kind of an institution in today's civilization that knows that women are not inferior to men, what kind of an organization would not have women to be the top position?
So the hierarchy is so invested, however, in a patriarchy, where
Yes.
Father, the Holy Father, all that, and they feel like if they give up on any of this, their whole structure is going to crumble, as well it should. But what kind of discussions have you had with any Catholic leaders? I mean, the Catholic laity are fairly liberal on this, but leaders gives you any hope?
Oh, I don't have great hope. don't misunderstand me. But I do feel that we have to put it on the table and start talking about it. My real goal is to get every religious denomination, every person talking about this simple concept that, quote unquote, homosexuality is a sin. When religions teach that, that is toxic. It's toxic to young people who happen to be LGBT. It's toxic to straight kids who then think they can bully other kids. It's toxic to parents because they unintentionally pummel their children and tell their children that they're broken. That is, as a business person, you know, if I have a problem with my store in New York, I go and find out what's the root of the problem. Is it the advertising? Is there construction in front of the front door? Is it bad salespeople? You know, what is the reason for the bad business? So what is the reason for people to vote against LGBT equality? What is the reason for a parent to say to their kid, you know, you're broken and this is wrong? What is the reason for a baker not to want to make a cake? It's because just on a basic level, they believe that we're sinners and an abomination, and that's ridiculous.
Well, you've been working on this for a long time. You wrote a wonderful book with stories of kids growing up with this kind of teaching oppressing them. You founded Faith in America. This has really been a long time crusade for you. And we get a little, you know, we sit here every week and yak about this stuff, but we get a little complacent in New York City, even though it can be an evil place too.
Right.
But you live in North Carolina, in rural North Carolina, and I wonder over the years, have you seen any liberalization of religious attitudes towards homosexuality, or has it just been a relentless march of negativity?
I am incredibly optimistic. And I'm optimistic because with my own eyes and ears, I have seen and heard people change. I have seen clergy like Reverend Stan Mitchell in Franklin, Tennessee, or Reverend David Gushee in Atlanta, or Danny Cortez out in California, or clergy in our town stand up in front of the GSA in our high school in rural North Carolina. There were 3 clergy who started by saying to kids, I just want to make this statement before I even begin. I do not believe homosexuality is a sin. And just imagine a clergy person in a county of 37,000 people with 14 traffic lights, beautiful rolling mountains, and over 100 churches. Imagine clergy saying that to a kid.
You're making me think, I apologize for this, but when I joined Dignity, the gay Catholic group in 1975, the first meeting, Father John McNeil, who wrote The Church and the Homosexual, he's talking to us, there are a couple of hundred of us, and he says, first of all, I want to say, no serious moral theologian thinks masturbation is a sin. And the whole room was like, oh. But because Father said it. Now, they all did it, but they must have felt some guilt about it or something. And there is this Father says thing. But don't we need to kind of get past that we are dependent upon what Father says?
Well, there's a lot. I think the really bigger part is there's a lot of adults who have children who are changing. And I've seen, whether it's evangelical or Catholic parents, I've seen people changing. Not enough, and here's what I call on. Every LGBT organization has to work and have a religion program that's not a side little program over here. It's like $1 million of a $40 million budget or some ridiculous number like that. But it should be front and center. If every LGBT advocate would join us and say, hey, churches, stop teaching it's a sin. It's irrelevant, it's misguided, it's misinformed. This is the way, if you're believing God, this is the way God created people. We should not tell young people that they're broken. This is, to me, the biggest reason why kids take their life. Yeah, you can say a kid was bullied at school, But they don't have a home to come home to that's with open arms and reassuring to that kid. That kid feels like they might not have anywhere to go.
The worst suicides that we've been hearing about lately seem to come within the Mormon Church.
In Utah, it's incredible. And the Mormon Church, great example, is starting to get a little frantic. And Dan Reynolds, who's the lead singer for Imagine Dragons, yes, who I've been privileged to meet and have dinner with and talk to, he is unbelievable. He's leading the charge because here's a straight guy who became aware in his early 20s of the harm that the church is causing to innocent, vulnerable kids, and he's taken a huge position on it. A year ago, he had a concert in Utah with 20,000 people that I attended, and he got the Mormon Church to help support it.
And he got many more this year.
And this year he raised, I think last year, I can't remember the number, let's say it was $100,000, but this year he's raised close to $1 million. I mean, he's incredible, but there's much more visibility about it. What we need is for everybody to come together. And I call on all the organizations to stand up and make this part of what you're doing. Stop saying that you can't talk about religion. If you can't talk about it, then get some other leadership in that can talk about it.
Well, the mainline Protestant denominations, within their churches, they've had caucuses of LGBT people, and they have moved them along. Episcopal Church, yes, others, some of them haven't gotten there completely, the mainlines, but they're small.
The Presbyterians have changed. Yeah. The Evangelical Lutheran Church has changed. Yeah. And by the way, the Baptist Church, there's different parts of the Baptist Church. There's Southern Baptist, but there's other Baptist churches, and there's an organization called Association of Welcoming and Affirming Baptists that are Baptist churches that have said we fully accept. And yes, if I could just say one more thing, yes, in Raleigh, there's a church that Reverend Jack McKinney was Southern Baptist minister of, and he realized that, holy Toledo, this is really wrong what we're doing, and he's changed that whole church. But one of the problems is in the Southern Baptist Convention, the minute you say, well, we affirm LGBT people, we don't believe it's a sin, psh, you're out of the convention.
They're starting to even pick up on the fact that their young people aren't down with a lot of this prejudice. On the other hand, the right-wing Southern Baptists at this point are running this country.
I agree with you 100%, and that's why we have to devote a lot of energy to educating them and changing them or marginalizing them. And when I say marginalizing them, here's an example. I would love all organizations to join us like we did a couple of years ago at the Southern Baptist Convention, and go to the Southern Baptist Convention and talk about the high suicide rates amongst these kids. Let the rank and file who are walking in those doors know what they've done. But here's the other big thing to do to marginalize them. Let's make sure that every year in June, we remind the Southern Baptist Convention that in 1995, they passed a ruling that apologized to African American people for their role in slavery and segregation. They recognized the inhumanity of their conduct, and they apologized and changed. I applaud them for doing it, but I'll bet you most Southern Baptists don't know that. I know because I asked them. But if we could remind them that this is a mistake they made, and part of leadership, a mark of leadership is humility, is to know when you've done something wrong, to change and move on and correct it. That's what the Southern Baptist Church has to do. They have a leadership position in this country on social laws. They need to recognize they've been incredibly wrong about this and move forward and change it.
But don't they accrue and maintain a lot of their power by scapegoating us?
Yes.
And are they likely to give up that power? I mean, Tony Perkins is not the personification of humility, and others who assert a religious
well, you're
basis.
right. Tony Perkins and the other significant leaders of these things are huge hypocrites, and it's part of the marginalization. We have to expose them and have everybody talking about it, and not just say, oh, we can't change those folks. We'll never be able to change people if we don't take the time to educate them.
Well, it's interesting that you talk about this religious prejudice and misunderstanding and miseducation as the core issue, because I don't think we focus on that. I think we look at discrimination laws or legal issues or whatever, but we don't really identify religion as the core issue for.
Right. Well, I think this is a huge problem. Some of the significant funders in America, one of the staff people said to me years ago, Mitchell, we can't deal with that because that's a heavy lift. But we're going for the low-hanging fruit. If we get that, then we can change the laws. And I said, but you don't understand. It's not the majority that changes laws. It's a minority of leadership people who are really vocal that make life miserable for us. We have to deal with them.
Well, one of the things Most worried about is all this religious freedom talk where they want the right to discriminate. But we saw in Mississippi, where they passed the worst kind of law like that. When they interviewed all the businesses, they said, no, we want the gay money. We want everybody to come in here. It's not a big push to discriminate. It is just a political stance, it seems.
It's a religious political stance.
Yes.
It's not the business.
The government adopts it. In Mississippi, the government adopts it.
But I think I understand. It's not business people who want these things. It's religious. It's anti-LGBT religious people. It's
And
the religious wrong.
Real-world consequences. They may not be doing a lot of enforcement of the Mississippi law, but they're people being fired every day by religious institutions or stigmatized or driven to suicide or whatever. I'm heartened by all the kids at Catholic schools who are standing up for their LGBT teachers. The Roncalli School in Indianapolis is the latest example, and those kids are organizing to support their married lesbian teacher.
They were wearing rainbow wristbands at the football game in honor of her.
Hundreds of them.
And Ellen had her on.
Right.
Well, that's predictable.
Well, and this is, when people say, well, it's generational and eventually will, I don't buy that. Because I think we can't wait for the next generation. But the next generation gives me great hope. Yeah. And the high school in our community is a good example. Gay Straight Alliance, over 50 members. And in general, it is much safer for a kid in our community now than it used to be. Not just because the administration said you have to be, but because other kids have now started to understand that, my parents are telling me that so-and-so is horrible. Not so much.
So you're in Faith in America, which is part of the Tyler Clementi Foundation now, and they're of course very big on, their big thing is stopping bullying. So what's giving you great hope there? And this is an intractable problem in humanity. It's not just in schools even, it's everywhere in life, and we see it in the streets now when you just take the train. But so what's giving you hope that's turning that around?
Well, we're just about to announce that we have a big program called True Faith Doesn't Bully. And it's so extraordinary to work with Jane Clemente because she's really come to understand that true faith doesn't bully. And what is bullying of faith?
Because she was not supportive of her son.
She was not.
As gay.
Yeah, she thought it was a sin, and she has changed. She's an example of change. And now, of course, it's horrible that she had to have such a tragedy in her life to cause that change, but she has really evolved. And I mean, she's the perfect example. She's a wonderful human being. She never meant any harm on any of us sitting at this table by the way she voted. But it was harmful, and now she's really come to understand that. So the program is to really get people to understand that what is bullying in faith? When a minister stands up in a church and says that homosexuality is a sin, that is bullying those kids in the pews. When parents sit at the dinner table and there's discussion of marriage equality or traditional marriage and stuff like that, and they say, oh, gays shouldn't be able to be married because they're inferior, they're immoral, they're sinners, that's bullying your kid. And
But I've always said parents who have this kind of faith think, if I accept it, I am consigning my child to the fires of hell forever.
That's why we have to educate them. They're not.
Well.
How do...
But there's always going to be people that think these horrible things, but they change. Not all of them. We don't need all of them, but we just need to keep this door opening. And a big part of what I want to do is really give voice to the people who have changed and let them express it. I'll tell everybody here, go on Facebook and follow Stan Mitchell. Reverend Stan Mitchell from Tennessee. He can't accept any more friends, but just follow him. Every day he posts 3 or 4 things, and he is in the trenches every day talking to this kid, to this parent, and there's people changing out there.
What's his denomination?
He was Southern Baptist.
And how do the current politics and the fever pitch of hatred and bigotry play into this?
It's horrible. I think that Donald Trump is really a horrible. I mean, I'm so worked up about it and so scared and sad about it. I mean, I'm not embarrassed to say that to you. He's bringing out the worst of so many. But as I said to Bob Woodward when I had lunch with him 2 years ago, not to drop a name, when he found out I was from North, when
you told him about your nervous breakdown over this.
when he found out I was from North Carolina, he said, well, what do you think of Donald Trump and how's it playing there? And I said, I want to say this clearly, Donald Trump represents what a lot of Republicans believe. He represents their agenda. Now, he might be obnoxious and boisterous in the way he does it, but you look at these folks, that is their agenda. And he said, well, do you think he's a racist? I said, I absolutely think he's a racist. And then he said to me, do you think Paul Ryan's a racist? I said, absolutely. Not by the way he talks nicely on TV, but by the agenda that he has. The things that he votes for are racist. They're homophobic, they're misogynistic. Now, and Donald Trump represents those values. When Hillary Clinton said deplorables, she should have stood by it and said, yes, and this is what deplorable is. When you don't treat women with equality, it's deplorable. When you don't treat gay people with dignity, it's deplorable.
I'm surprised Bob Woodward didn't know this.
Well, I think he knows it. I
He's
think
a
he
little
knows a lot more
Republican
now.
himself.
Yeah, is he really?
Well, yeah, he's been quite biased in favor of the establishment.
But Trump
in a
calls
way
his
that-
partner, Carl Bernstein, a degenerate fool.
Right. Well, I think now with Mr. Woodward's new book, it'll be interesting what happens.
Yes.
But my point is, I think that the politics today are really toxic, and it's horrible, and they've given voice to are the worst of the worst. In where I live, there are Confederate flags now flying high, not just little ones, but big ones. And you know, it's done on every street corner, but I would say there's like there's actually one as you enter Hickory from one area, one from another area, and then one in town. And what does that say?
Well, didn't the Confederate flag
says we're angry.
Didn't the Confederate battle flag get incorporated into a lot of state flags in the wake of desegregation?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they didn't have it before.
Yeah. Yes.
So it's
and a
all-
lot of those statues went up in Woodrow Wilson's period, not right after the Civil War.
Oh, absolutely. And they went up later than that. They went up, you know, in the 50s and 60s. Yeah. I mean, I think the whole thing with statues is completely absurd. I mean, why in the world would you have a Confederate flag, Confederate statue? And what does that say to an African-American kid walking by? What does it say to an
Go
adult?
away.
What does it say to a
Sam
Jew?
is down.
Yeah.
Well, for the moment, he's moving. Well, I'm happy to hear you're optimistic. I want your optimism to spread and take hold everywhere immediately, but it's dicey.
It's not easy. And I tell you, it's not easy for me because I haven't had, open arms with most of the advocacy organizations to understand how important religion is and how important a role it plays.
You think they're giving lip service and not
I think
doing
they
the
don't
real
get it,
work?
and I think they're afraid to talk about it. It's a difficult subject. You have to learn a little bit, and it's kind of like what I say. You want to come sell furniture for me? You got to learn a little bit. You got to know what you're talking about so you can engage.
And you have to be bold about stepping up to engage and not being afraid of.
Absolutely.
We've been fighting it here on Gay USA for 33 years.
Yeah,
Can
to
I tell?
what-
Can
to
I
what
tell you?
end?
Can I tell you one last thing? I went to a
Yes.
meeting in Hickory of a whole group of Southern Baptist ministers. They didn't know I was. They didn't know I knew about it. They didn't know I was sitting in the audience, and they were talking about all the various leaders in the state and the leaders from HRC, the national leaders, and who to be careful of was coming in. It was during the time of the marriage amendment. And then they showed this big picture of me, and it says, and this gay activist businessman, and then people started to realize that I was in the audience. So like I often do, I went down afterwards and I spoke with the whole group. And we had a nice exchange of ideas, a nice exchange of discussion. And one of them finally said to me, well, it's just not natural. The parts don't fit. And I looked at him in front of everybody and I said, let me just say this to you. You brought it up, not me. And let me just say this. The parts do fit, and I would contend they fit better.
You again make me think of it. We're bringing back memories because the University of Virginia, they had a fundamentalist preacher at the basketball stadium, big, thousands of people, and I went as the gay activist and I stood up and confronted him and about gay stuff, and he stopped his presentation and stopped it. And then all these people descended on me, and they were much more upset that I was a Catholic than I was gay.
Well, you should live down south and be from the north.
That was the University of Virginia.
But one thing I really want to emphasize is I don't see people who vote against me as my enemy and as horrible people. I know there are some, obviously, like Tony Perkins stuff, but the community that I live in has really taught me that these are really wonderful, good people, but they are being misled by their church's leadership, and it's really hurting them and their families and their community.
But those people, I'm curious about them because they're good people. Are you seeing any evolution in terms of whether they're going to stick with Trump?
Well, be frank with you, I don't really talk about that at my factory or in the community that much. That's just not something that comes up. But what comes up more is people will stop me literally if I'm at the bank walking out or in the factory. I have people come in, I have a very open door policy. I've had people come and say to me, I just don't understand this. My neighbor's daughter just came out. And people want to be accepting. We've got to be the ones to give that leadership, because a lot of times the ministers in town are pretty angry at me. Some of them.
But it's true. You have to give people the opportunity to express themselves and to learn. And that's certainly what we found in the work we've done in the schools, of going and talking to kids who are virulently homophobic when you walk in the classroom. But if you give them the opportunity to express themselves and support where they are, and then offer yourself openly to
and lead by asking the right questions.
Yes, then you can have a conversation.
I often ask people in the community, I say, do you know about the apology to African Americans in 1995, the Southern Baptist Convention? Didn't quite know about that.
And the Mormons changing on black people.
Right, and get them to understand that the church has changed. It's not in stone.
Right.
All right, well, keep changing them, please, and
Keep
come back.
up the good fight.
And come back
And
here
let us-
and report.
And let us know how we can help. Always let us know.
Yes.
Thank you, I appreciate
Yes.
it. Really
Okay.
do.
Thanks, Mitchell.
Yeah,
Thank
good
you.
to see you.
Good to see you. All right, we're sliding Mitchell out and heading for the headlines. And there we are.
Okay.
All right.
Well, we did have.
Thank you, Mitchell.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right.
We did have an election yesterday, and I don't know. Of course, the most prominent result was Ayanna Pressley winning that congressional primary in Massachusetts.
And being absolutely charming in her surprise that she won.
But it's a signal to the party, which this is the part that I like.
The
that
Democratic Party.
You better be very progressive this year, or you're not going to win.
Well, I would say that's local option. I
Okay.
don't think that's going to pertain everywhere, but it's a lovely result.
Well,
I want the party to give the option for local option.
We have mixed feelings sometimes about the work of the Human Rights Campaign, but I like what they're doing in the midterms. They have identified what they call pro-equality voters. They've been doing this for a long time. But in Indiana and Missouri alone, they've identified 500,000 pro-equality voters. In Montana, 100,000 pro-equality voters. That means they're on these people. They want to make sure they get to the polls. The Democratic Senate candidates in these supposedly, states that are dicey, maybe we're not going to win them, they are openly embracing LGBT issues to excite the base.
The whole question is turnout. That is the issue. It is, can the progressive voters turn out in numbers that they did not in 2016 and that they have not always in these races before? Now, we have a big primary coming up here in New York next week on Thursday, yes, Thursday, September 13th, where we'll be choosing Democratic candidates for governor, lieutenant governor, a separate vote, by the way, and attorney general, and congressional candidates and all of that. So please, turn out, get out and vote next Thursday.
There's an out lesbian running for governor,
I've heard
Cynthia
that.
Nixon, I think. I like to call her Cynthia.
So does she.
Because I don't like saying Nixon. But she can redeem the name if she wins. And by the way,
We haven't discussed the debate.
Oh, well, I thought Cynthia got off to a slow start, and then I think when she hit her stride, she was great. And I think Andrew
agree.
Cuomo showed himself to be, to use a word we've been talking about, a bully.
Yeah.
Because he's a nasty piece of work. And I know, yes, he got marriage equality years ago, but we need to clean up Albany in New York.
Well, look, I do not give him credit for marriage equality. He was against it for many, 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 many years.
I'm the one who pushed him.
He, among others.
No, I'm just saying. I would ask him repeatedly, and he would oppose it.
Sure. I think the point you're making is that he was against marriage equality. So he helped get it passed because everyone forced him to, and because he knew where his success lay was by getting that done. I don't give him credit for that.
He's running on it, as if this is what makes him a great progressive. But, but the big issue with Andrew Cuomo is he has empowered the Republican minority in New York to keep them in power in the state Senate so that he doesn't have to deal with both houses being in the hands of Democrats.
Exactly. But now, again, he has been forced to nominally support the challengers to the independent Democrats.
Right, nominally.
Exactly what I said.
No, I want to emphasize that.
Okay.
Now, for Attorney General, it's a hot race. You've got an out-gay candidate, Sean Patrick Maloney, who we've had our differences with over the years. Tish James, the public advocate of New York, and
Not out.
and Zephyr Teachout, who was the more progressive candidate, and Licia Eve. Now, Chris Quinn is now talking about running for public advocate if Tish James wins.
Well, Tish James may not win. She's in trouble at the moment because she made a public appearance with Donnie McClurkin, the ex-gay minister who brags about his conversion therapy, and people were not very happy about that.
I think that's the reason Tish hasn't dealt with a lot of it. I mean, Tish is always out there on LGBT issues when people are attacked, things like that. But I think she's very church, and I think that can be a problem.
It was a problem.
Mitchell Gold might be very appreciative that she's out there in the churches trying to change things.
Well, it's a lot of food for thought to think of really focusing on religion as the core issue and concentrating your efforts there as a way to eradicate homophobia.
I mean, look, we've both done it for years. I mean, but are the churches homophobic because people are homophobic, or vice versa? Does the church make you homophobic? I think it just gives people who have uncomfortableness with homosexuality, well, it's a sin. They may not even go to church.
But why are they uncomfortable? Because the church has taught them that.
I think homophobia is more deeply rooted than that. It's not just. I think it is deeply rooted in people's ideas about what it is to be a man, what it is to be a woman.
But where did they get those ideas?
I think some of it is quite innate and inside. Why, when you seriously, Ann, when you're walking down a street and you're holding hands with someone of the same sex, and some straight guy goes, and then wants to beat you up.
Yes.
Is that because the Pope told him to do it?
I think it is a lot about what people. I certainly think it's what people are taught. I don't think people are born that way.
I think it's about my manhood and me distinguishing myself from them. And I don't think there aren't a lot of women gay bashers. There are some anti-gay women, but
Lots.
Yes.
Lots.
But they don't go around beating people up generally.
Well, that may be
I'm saying how
a
visceral
gender
it is.
difference.
I'm trying to talk about how visceral it is.
Of course it is, but
and these people don't go to church.
But it's taught from an early age.
You've got to be taught.
Exactly.
How about John McCain's funeral?
How about it?
Well, I mean,
I had about 10 seconds of optimism in the middle of that. And then I reminded myself that there were a bunch of hypocrites sitting there who were not going to fulfill all the
Exactly. They're all applauding
words.
Bipartisanship, all big phonies, and then they're going to go back and do the same thing.
And then that war criminal Henry Kissinger shows up, and I really
It was nice.
unhappy.
It was nice to see Trump being vilified by the establishment, but that's who they are, and they're out of power.
It really, the most forceful statement was from Meghan McCain, who much more forceful than Obama or Bush or anybody else, I thought.
Yes.
So I applaud her for that. But in the end, she's a conservative Republican.
Yes. Now, but she didn't get the appointment to the Senate seat in Arizona. It went to
no, we
Kyle.
were not expecting that.
Well, it was floated, as was floated about Cindy too. All right, let's talk about the Kavanaugh nomination.
Yes.
I want to put up this picture by Norman Rockwell that I saw this weekend, The Right to Know. It's one of his most famous pictures. He did it in 1968, and that is the title of the picture. It's called The Right to Know. I hope we get to see it. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. It's about our right to know. And with this guy, Kavanaugh, we are not being given the right to know. His papers are being hidden. He's being allowed to sit there and lie. There'll be maybe something will have come out by the time you see this, but I'm very depressed watching the hearings.
Lambda Legal Defense and the Windy City Times, the LGBT newspaper in Chicago, have filed a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information Act request, for his papers from the Bush years, all the ones that have anything to do with homosexuality. because in the Bush years, of course, there were proposals for the federal marriage amendment and support of marriage amendments in the states across the country. So we'd like to know, because his record and his opinions on gay issues are not very well known.
Well, I mean, look, it looks like abortion rights will be severely trimmed, if not taken away entirely. Same-sex marriage can be trimmed, if not taken away entirely, but maybe, and in some states, and labor rights and environmental rights, all these things taken away. And I don't know, do people have to lose things before you will fight for them?
They're already losing things across the country with Trump's economic policies and his support of religious freedom amendments. Discrimination is rampant. Protections are being eliminated, and that has not changed his course.
Whenever Kavanaugh is involved in a split decision, 87% of the time he sides with the powerful. His main qualification, and Rachel was very good on this, is that presidents are above the law. That's his main. That's why he was picked.
Well, sure, that is exactly why.
He was talking about his dedication to the homeless. He does serve in a homeless shelter. He feeds the homeless all the time. And he was talking about, and these are our brothers and sisters and this kind of stuff. And through no fault of their own, they're out there. He doesn't mention that. Did he ever look at the fact that they are disproportionately gay people, adult homeless people, and youth, of course. But I'm sure that didn't even occur to him. I would love watching.
Well, he certainly hasn't been asked.
I love watching the Ruth Bader Ginsburg documentary on CNN. If it gets repeated, do see it. What a record! What a towering figure.
RBG.
Stay on the court until you're 110.
Now, I'd like to think that we saw Kavanaugh's true character, in spite of all his talk about feeding the homeless and coaching his kids' basketball teams, in that flash of rejection and turning away from the father of the girl killed at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida. That was one of the most chilling moments I've seen in a long time.
He's a gun nut, this guy.
And not only did he turn away and reject the guy's handshake the moment he realized who he was and what he was saying, but he then sent security back in to get the guy removed from the room. It was just chilling is the best description, I think.
And
hideous.
Very heartening to see all the protesters there. Almost everybody who waited online to go hear the hearings were people who wanted to protest. Where was your cheering section, Mr. Kavanaugh?
Front rows. And speaking of the Supreme Court, one piece of good news from the Supreme Court in a case out of Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia Catholic Social Services tried to appeal a lower court ruling that said the city of Philadelphia was entitled to withhold funds from them for their adoption services because they discriminated against LGBT parents, and they have a non-discrimination law in Philadelphia. So Catholic Services went to court and tried to appeal to the Supreme Court on the grounds that this was a violation of their religious freedom, and the Supreme Court refused the case.
They will once Kavanaugh is seated. What are you talking about?
It's a well, you only need 4 votes to take the case.
But they don't want to take it if it's a divided court.
Yes.
And they don't, so they don't know what's. So believe me, we're
only a delay.
But here's the question.
I don't care. It's still a delay.
Can the courts force the city of Philadelphia to fund a discriminatory organization?
We'll find out.
You must fund them.
We'll find out. Well, they can say you can't withhold funds on these grounds.
So it was nice to see that Trump's disapproval's up to 60%. But somebody did an analysis that how many people really would stick by him if he shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and
I don't think that's the issue.
They figure it's about 18%. 15%. Only 18% want him to fire Mueller, and 49% want impeachment. Winter is coming, we are being told, but before there's winter, there must be the fall. All right, and Steve Bannon, I don't know if we want to talk about that, maybe you don't. But I tell you, I was really appalled by this, and it was drawn, Masha Gessen wrote about it, lesbian writer, about the denaturalization task force that Stephen Miller has set up. in the White House, trying to throw citizens out for innocent mistakes when you were becoming a citizen. Some of those are LGBT people. One of the questions you get asked, I want to read this to you, is, have you ever committed a crime of any kind? Parenthesis, even if you were not arrested, cited, charged with, or tried for that crime. Well, in your country, homosexuality may be a crime, and you may have said you didn't commit a crime, and they could go after your citizenship over this.
They're challenging birth certificates of people born anywhere near the southern border.
If you want to talk about chilling,
yeah,
this is Nazi stuff. Just Nazi stuff. Just look at Stephen Miller and the rest of them.
Okay.
All right.
Are we done with all of that?
Yes, we are.
All right. In California, we have been happy about the fact that the legislature was passing a law defining paid conversion therapy for adults as business fraud. But
which they did in New York.
But
City.
the gay assemblyman, Evan Lowe, who was sponsoring that law, has postponed it. They're not going to get it signed yet because there have been some objections raised, technicalities by religious organizations who are afraid it's going to have unintended consequences. So that's on the back burner at the moment while they have negotiations over that.
You know, we talk about gay bashing, but here's one from Harvey Milk Plaza in the Castro. Michael Levy kicked by an assailant shouting anti-gay slurs right there in the Castro.
All right, we should talk about Janet Weinberg.
Oh, yes.
She was a great lesbian leader here in New York City. There, she is on the left with her wife, Roz Richter, who's a local judge.
Well, she's a judge of the
State
appellate
judge.
division in New York.
Okay.
Justice.
Correct, thank you.
Yeah.
But Janet was a leader and executive at the LGBT Community Center here. She worked in development a lot. She was at GMHC for some years.
She was
and
the CEO of GMHC.
took over as interim CEO for a while, and most recently was at the Education Alliance as an executive. But she was a mover and shaker here for many years, involved with many organizations and people.
A beloved person, a beloved figure. When you ran into Janet, she was always friendly, open, one of the nicest people I knew in the movement, and she's being deeply mourned. I mean, at GMHC, she's the one who got dedicated mental health and substance use centers opened at GMHC.
Always a fighter for the right values and the right issues.
Only 63 years old. We know that she had been diagnosed with breast cancer about 5 years, 2012.
But
but we don't know.
She died suddenly. We don't know of what. So there was a private funeral service. There will be a memorial sometime later this fall. We'll give you the details when we know more about that. Very much.
Yes.
All right. In Chicago, the murder of another trans woman, Dejane Stanton, 24 years old, shot dead.
And in Louisiana, Vontasia Bell was also killed on August 30th. All these cases are very similar. A lot of these are transgender women working in the margins of society in very rough environments that we consign them to, and they get killed. But
Louisiana has the highest rate of murders of trans women.
But in Charleston, South Carolina, an arrest has been made in the attack on a trans woman there on August 19th. The police, working with the Alliance for Full Acceptance, got a guy named Christopher Price, 30 years old, charged him with second-degree assault. In this, they don't have a hate crimes law there. And the police chief apologized for saying in the beginning of this, the victim wasn't assaulted because she's a transgender. Well, at least he apologized.
Yeah. In Wilton Manors, Florida, which is a very gay town, we told you some years ago, 2010, about the murder of a gay couple there, Stephen Adams and Kevin Powell, by a guy who they had given some shelter to. And I think he was someone who had gotten out of jail and they'd befriended him, or he did some work for them, and he was living with them and he murdered them.
Well, they met for sex through like Craigslist or something.
Never mind. Peter,
he might have done all that too.
Yeah, Peter Avsanu, 33 years old. Well, he has just finally been given a death sentence, mostly because he showed no remorse and was professing his desire to keep doing this. Here's his quote: "It is my duty as a white man to cull the weak and timid from existence. Homosexuals are a disease to mankind and must be put down. Now, we're not fans of the death penalty.
Nope, we're against it.
Yeah.
But that, boy.
So we're not in favor of this, but life in prison would have been a nice sentence.
We've been talking about the Asia Argento case where she's accused. She was somebody who was complaining about Harvey Weinstein's sexual harassment, and she's now accused of having sexually assaulting a 17-year-old actor, Jimmy Bennett, with whom she worked. Now she is saying he assaulted me.
We do not know the answer to
We
any
don't,
of
but
this.
it's all, we just were trying to report the developments.
Well, and speaking of he said, this whole fight between the Vatican and Vigano, now they're fighting over Kim Davis.
Yes.
Because the Pope had this audience with Kim Davis a couple of years ago when he was here, and he is saying that Vigano set him up for that and didn't tell him what Kim Davis, the clerk in Kentucky, was really all about, who refused to give marriage licenses to same-sex couples. And he said, you didn't tell me she had, what, 3 husbands or something. And Vigano says, oh, yes, the Pope knew all about this. He's a liar. He's making all this up.
Well,
he was fully briefed.
I'm not rooting for anybody in the fight because they're all bad, well. But I am rooting for the New Jersey Appellate Division because they ruled that the partner in a non-marital same-sex families can claim relief for emotional distress. That's a breakthrough.
And I am rooting for this new study that has come out from doctors who looked at research over years and tens of thousands of people and say that doctors should be asking kids about their feelings about gender identity. Pre-adolescents, kids as young as 10 or 11.
Yes.
And bringing the subject
Good
up.
doctors should ask all kinds of
Yes.
questions. Mostly don't. They want to get you in and out. Certainly therapists should be asking about this, all these questions, and often,
But it's a routine thing,
Yes.
and it's something we talked about in HIV for years, that doctors should be routinely asking about people's sexual practices and vulnerability to HIV and doing routine testing instead of being scared to raise the subject. And now this is raised in the context of gender identity,
Well,
which I think is great.
Dr. Thomas Frieden said we shouldn't be wasting time on all those questions. We should just test. And look what happened to him. He was arrested for
the new Prime Minister of Australia has said there should be no gender whisperers in classrooms bringing up these issues.
Hey, college football fans, watch this year because there are now 7 out players on the field, a record. You can Google this and find out the list. I read where these schools were, and they're all over the place.
Are they in Alabama?
They're not in urban centers. You go read the list.
Okay.
If you want, I'll put a link to the article with our newsletter this week.
Apple, it turns out, is being a little subtly discriminatory. This is their Rainbow Watch, but if you turn it on in Russia, you get a black screen, not the rainbow screen, because they are conforming to Russia's law, their no promo homo law.
They don't want to hurt children. The rainbow hurts children. In the Netherlands, out-gay advocacy director of the Human Rights Watch, he's been on this show, Boris Dietrich, he's resigning to run for the Dutch Senate from the Social Liberal Party.
Good luck, Boris.
He had served in the House.
In Chile, the legislature has passed a new law to allow people to change their gender identity on their documents as young as 14.
So in Taiwan, again, the court told them to do same-sex marriage. They didn't. Then they passed this law that said you can do a referenda. So they have a referendum from the Happiness of the Next Generation Alliance that says, do you agree with legalizing same-sex marriage under the Civil Code? And they have a sort of an ancillary one that says, do you agree we should use rules other than the Civil Code to protect the rights of same-sex couples to initiate a long-term relationship to live together? So those are their two.
It's hard to discern which is the pro-marriage and which is the anti-marriage.
No, our side is, do you agree that the Civil Code should only allow opposite same-sex marriage? Now the question is, what if you pass all these things? Then what are you going to do?
And what does that do to the court decision that mandated the legalization of these relationships?
Well, I think these referenda are meant to override that.
Yes, they pretty much are. Well, also trying to override this is in Guatemala, the president has come out in support of a bill to outlaw same-sex marriage. In doing so, they have to defy the ruling from the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, which has mandated marriage legalization across Central and South America. They have also killed in the legislature a gender identity and expression non-discrimination bill. Also had been mandated by the court, but they're trying to ignore all of that. So activists are going to have to go back to the court to, if these things pass, to have the court reaffirm the mandate for them. So activists held a big demonstration in Guatemala this weekend. We have a picture of that.
Well, the president of Guatemala, Jimmy Morales, has been demagoguing on anti-women issues, anti-LGBT issues to distract from his corruption and a sex abuse investigation.
We are the scapegoats.
I am surprised that he hasn't been invited to the White House.
In St. Vincent and the Grenadines, the prime minister there, Dr. Ralph Gonzalez, condemned an attack by a mob on 3 gay men.
And we told you last week about Donald Duke, who was running for president in Nigeria, and he made some open statements about gay stuff, not all the way, but fine. But he had second thoughts this week, and he said homosexuality is a crime. Japan, they got 25,000 signatures against this woman who said some anti-gay things. It's unbelievable how that's taken off. In Canada, teachers union are suing the Ontario government over their anti-gay sex ed curricula.
In Malaysia, they went ahead with the caning of 2 young women who were caught trying to have sex in a car. They got 6 lashes each in open court with an audience of 100 people and fines of $800 each. Really, really cruel.
And Australia denied a visa to Chelsea Manning to come in, so she spoke via video and got a standing ovation.
In Palermo, Sicily, 2 gay boys were sitting on a park bench and got beaten up by passing homophobes.
By the time you see this, there may be a decision from the High Court of India about sodomy, and we think that they're going to overturn it. And in Turkey, a gay refugee couple that was separated over there have arrived in Canada. They got married, and they were going to live happily ever after. They went to, well, it's a long story, but it's a sweet story.
In Switzerland, we note the death of very early gay activist Robbie Rapp. He was 88. He was the subject of a movie called The Circle. He had published one of the first gay magazines in the 1940s, Der Kreis. He and his partner were the first couple legally registered in Switzerland. They were together for 61 years.
And the Village Voice died at the age of 60. Had an enormous gay impact over the years, and not always positive, but mostly positive, and a lot of LGBT writers over the years.
All right. AIDS news?
Yes.
Now we want to leave time for the...
Yes. In Massachusetts, there was an outbreak of 129 cases of AIDS, HIV, largely driven by shared needles and the opioid epidemic. And this is a reversal of a downward trend that began in 2010. And in Texas, a judge is about to rule on Obamacare. This is an anti-gay judge, Reed O'Connor. They always go to him to get these bad rulings.
Yeah.
But this could end Obamacare because the Congress already voted that it's no longer, that the tax is over, and then he can say, well, then it's unconstitutional, so let's get rid of it. Let me tell you what will happen. 17 million people are going to lose their health insurance. 52 million people with pre-existing conditions are not going to be covered anymore. And this can go to the Supreme Court, and then you'd have Kavanaugh again.
And this is this one judge who has done terrible damage across the board.
He voted to extend, blocked Obama's efforts to extend medical leave to same-sex couples and include gender identity discrimination under sex discrimination, under the health law.
People go to him for judge shopping.
20 Republican attorney generals brought this. Why would anybody vote Republican?
Moving on.
Aren't the Democrats bad enough?
I saw a movie that is available now out on video on demand and DVD from Wolf Video. They produce some great stuff or distribute some great stuff. This is a little movie called Venus, and it's a sort of romantic comedy about an Indian American family and their trans daughter, who finds out that she had a son with an old college friend years ago. The son shows up. He's quite taken by the fact that he has a trans father who's now a mother. And
it's cool.
It's very cute, and it's called Venus, and here's the trailer for the movie.
Hey, kid! I've seen you following me around for the past couple of days.
You're Sid Gill?
Yeah?
You're my dad.
It's here again.
You dated my mom. Why did you guys break up?
That's complicated.
You're transgender?
Yeah.
That is so cool. Are you still Indian?
By this age, you should be married. You should have a family.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Mom. I have a son. Surprise!
Ralph, what kind of bakwas name is that? I will call you Rajinder. His skin and bones. Look at him. Are you hungry?
Who's this?
I'm his father. Mother, but I'm working that part out.
Do you have a boyfriend?
That's even more complicated.
You got the best deal. You got to skip the dirty diaper phase, the potty training, the temper tantrums, blah, blah, blah. Skip straight ahead to prepackaged teenager.
That's just so nice.
What about your parents, Ralph? Don't they want to meet us?
Well, how have you been?
You have a girlfriend?
Are you crazy?
Picking up your kid? My girlfriend's. It's mine.
This kid is manipulating us.
I think we need to have a talk. I'm out of this world. How else can I explain how strange I feel on this planet?
Can I ask you something? How come you guys never go out?
You tell me you want to be a woman, then you get angry when I accept you as a woman. I only have one child. Tell me what you want.
I want you to accept me as I am now.
What are you, huh?
He's not my dad.
This is important.
I think she doesn't understand you. She has been in your shoes. She always spoke her mind. Sound familiar?
We'll take care of each other. I don't want to lose you.
I must have landed here from Venus.
I always imagined Sid with a woman, not as a woman.
Okay, it looks sweet.
It's very cute. Venus is the name of the movie.
And if you want to see Ciarán McKellen do his King Lear from London, go to your listings at ntlive.org for a theater near you that will show it. It starts on September 27th.
Authorities have dropped charges in one of the cases against Kevin Spacey. They say the statute of limitations ran out. They cannot prosecute him for that, but they are looking at other charges, other cases, other accusations against him. So,
And Law and Order is starting Law and Order Hate Crimes.
God, really?
Yes.
Okay. I might finally have to see my first episode of Law and Order.
Oh my God.
I know. I'm
Take care.
I'm
Thanks
a Law
for
and
being
Order
with us.
virgin. See you next week.
Bye.